Hey guys, Brian here for Better Chess Training, and in today's video I will be sharing a game that I played recently, and it has some at least I thought, interesting strategic and tactical themes. I will be giving commentary geared towards more beginner and newer players, so I hope you enjoy it. Check it out. Hey guys, I'd like to share a game with you today, and like I've done in a few other videos, I'm going to try to gear my commentary for more beginner and newer players, and really try to explain the tactics and strategy behind my thoughts so that you can understand chess better. This was a game I played on Lee Chess about a week ago. By the way, I hope everyone is doing well. I know it is a strange times for us around the world, and so I wish everyone good health and hope that I find you in good spirits here as we're sharing this video together. Anyways, let's continue. Started out, I was playing white, and my opponent, we're about the same rating here. Lee Chess Blitz rating around 1930 or so. And here I play e4, my opponent plays e6, and I play d4. My opponent plays d5. This is the French defense, counterattacking against the e-pawn. And I play what's called the exchange by taking on d5, and my opponent taking back. You can see it's a symmetrical pawn structure. And well, what it allows white to do, it allows white to get very good development, because you can see now both bishops can get out as well as the knights. So we will see in other French defense formations, a lot of the time the pawn structure gets locked, and then there's a little more maneuvering that takes place. But maybe we'll do another type of video on that some other time, and I have other videos on the channel about those types of pawn structures. So here I play knight to f3, developing my knight, protecting d4. Pretty standard move. My opponent plays bishop to d6, also developing, and probably to the bishop's best square here. Little nuance, this also prevents me from developing the bishop to f4, which is a good thing for black, because that would be a nice square to put that bishop. And here I play c4, immediately attacking this pawn in the center. Now, if my opponent took right away with d takes c4, I would take back with the bishop. And now I have a little bit of a lead in development, but then we come to this isolated pawn structure. And I've talked about this before on the channel, but just to give you an idea, in general, there are both good things and bad things about these types of structures. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but in general, white enjoys a little more space as well as some open lines, while black has long-term chances if he's able to stop this pawn from advancing too far and is able to attack it, because you can see there are no pawns on the files next to it to protect it. But so that is one idea. Instead, my opponent plays b6. And actually, this is a mistake. And I think the idea here is to prevent me from advancing this pawn here on c5. But the problem is, and I'll show you here, is that it introduces these weaknesses now on the light squares. And it's not something that we can take advantage of immediately, but as we'll see in the game, it can cause a lot of problems if you haven't worked it out. There are different openings that have these types of formations, and this b6 getting played, but in this case, it isn't that great. What should black play instead? Black typically plays c6 here, and the idea is that if I were for some reason to play c5, which would not be a great move, but if I were to play c5, he could just drop his bishop back. And so instead, my opponent plays b6, and what this allows me to do, it allows me to win this pawn. And as you can see here, the idea is not just that I'm going to be up material with this pawn, because this is actually a very temporary state for the material, but it also opens these lines here, you can see, for the bishop and for the queen. Okay, my opponent puts me in check. a logical move. And here I block with the knight. Now, this knight is not really protecting this pawn at the moment because it is pinned. I can't move it. So black takes back. And here, this is where we start to exploit these weaknesses on the light squares here with queen to a4 check. So of course I'm threatening to take this bishop as well as checking the king. So my opponent is forced to play knight to c6, protecting this bishop. Now, of course, my knight is still pinned. So if for some reason I can unpin here by eliminating this bishop, then I would be able to capture his queen. Of course, I can't do that right now. So instead, I increase the pressure on this knight. You can see here, right now, it's only being protected by the queen, and now I'm attacking it twice. Okay, so that forces my opponent to take here on c3. He tries to do something else. For example, if he plays here with bishop to d7 to protect this knight, then I can just take here, for example, and if he takes back, for example, with the bishop, then I can take his bishop, okay, and then I would actually be up material. Of course, in this case too, if I take with the bishop, then he can take here first with check, and then after I take back with the pawn, then he can take back, which would maintain the material balance. Okay, so we go back to the game. Plays bishop to c3, takes c3 check, and I take back here. He takes c3, so now my pawn is no longer isolated, and this pawn on c3 is protecting it, also preventing this knight from going to 4. But black still has a problem because his knight is pinned here, and now I'm threatening to win it with check. So he plays bishop to d7. And I take this opportunity to castle. So I don't need to rush right away. In fact, by castling, I put my king, get my king to safety, and I'm threatening now rook to e1. Okay, and then my opponent makes kind of a big mistake. White already has an advantage here because his development is a lot more aggressive, a little more advanced, and black's king is stuck in the center. But he makes a bigger mistake here. He plays knight g to e7. And it doesn't seem like a big deal because he's protecting this knight again. And then soon he can castle and get out of the way. However, the problem is because all of these pieces it's kind of a delicate balance with all of these pieces here. So I was able to take advantage. And why don't you, if you want, you can pause the video. See if you can find the best move for white. Actually, there's several good moves. So see if you can find one of those good moves. And I will pause for 5 seconds here, but you can pause the video and think a little longer. Okay, well, the general idea here is this queen is protecting a lot of pieces here, and there's a lot of interrelationships between all of these pieces. So the move that I played in the game and what I think is best here was c4. Basically, pushing this queen around, and let's just look at a few variations. And there were a couple other good moves which I'll show you as well. For example, if in the game my opponent played queen to f5, which we'll look at in a little bit, but let's say he plays queen to d6 because he wants to stay in contact here. Well, there's a bunch of really good moves I can play. What I had intended to play here was e5. And if this knight moves, for example, here to b4, then instead of, we don't need to take right away, we could actually just pin this knight again. That makes it very dangerous. Let's take a look here. If the bishop now takes, then we just take with check. Okay? And then after, for example, king moves or something like queen to d7, then we just take here on b4. Okay. Similarly, let's just take a look here. If the king moves to d8, then we can actually take with the bishop now. So this is very dangerous. for black. But let's go back here, and again, we'll look at what black played. But just to go back here real quick, there were a couple other good moves. You might have thought of rook to e1, pinning this knight, and that also is an excellent move. And then the final one that I thought was, these are actually moves I considered during the game too, was bishop to a3. Again, threatening this knight here and with all these interrelationships. So this can get very complicated. And, you know, when you analyze these types of positions on your own and with the computer, I wouldn't worry necessarily about getting the absolute best move. Really, you're just looking for winning moves here, or very good moves. So those three moves, rook to e1, bishop to a3, and what I played in the game, c4, are both excellent moves. Now, the engine does say that c4 is the best, but I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. If I had played bishop to a3, I would have been just as happy, because it gives a winning advantage. Okay, let's continue on here. c4 was played, and my opponent played queen to f5. And here, again, we want to continue with the pressure. And what I chose here, again, was one of the very strong move with this theme of attacking these different relationships between the pieces. And here I played bishop to a3. Now you can see visually this is a very attractive position. My opponent's king is in the middle. My rooks are connected. One of them's ready to come to e1. I'm threatening to play d5 at some point. So it's very good. But we also have to be very accurate here, because black can almost, he's almost ready to get out. Although in this case, it might be too late already. And my opponent makes a big mistake here. He castles queenside. And before we see what happens here, let's just take a look at some different options. Now, one option would have been to attack my bishop here with the idea that if I take here on c5, then in a way my opponent kind of gets a little bit out of trouble here, because example here, and then he can castle queenside here, with the general idea that he gets out of kind of this, a lot of trouble. Here in this case, if he's trying to protect this knight, it can go really badly. For example, if he plays queen to c7, then I can just increase the pressure with rook to e1, and now he has to give up this knight. It's pinned, and he can't add any more defenders to it. So that would be pretty bad here if he were to play something like a6. But so there's really not too much my opponent could have done in this situation. Let me just look at some other options. Maybe playing queen to f6 to defend here as well as here. But again, we have a lot of options. For example, just taking on e7. Then if he does take, of course he can't take with the knight because I'll win the bishop on d7. And then if he takes back with the queen, well, his queen's going to get pinned, as well as losing the knight here on c6. Okay, so let's go back to the game. Then my opponent kind of went from the frying pan into the fire here, and he castled. So here, calculated a few options, and maybe I didn't play the very best move. Apparently, the best move, according to the chess engine, would have been something like d5, but I think I played a very good move. Bishop takes e7, and here's the idea. After knight takes e7, now this a7 pawn is hanging. And what I did in the game, I played bishop takes e7, and after queen takes e7, I took here on a7. But another option would have been to go ahead and take on a7 first. And after bishop takes b5, c takes b5, and then queen to d5 to protect my king. I have knight to e5, which is very strong. And the whole point here is that Black's not going to get mated, but I'm going to have a big material advantage. Brings his queen back to try to protect this king, and I could actually, if I wanted to, I could actually just take here, and after this exchange, and something like this happened in a game, just take here on c7. Now, forking these two rooks. Okay? So you can see how bad that was. But let's go back to the game here. Instead, actually, let's go back here. Bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, and I did take here, kind of simplifying the situation. Bishop takes d7 check, queen takes d7, and here, queen to a7. Of course, I do have a threat here. What is my threat? Go ahead and think about that for a minute or for a couple seconds. And of course, my threat is queen to a8 check, just to show you that. Let's say he played something silly like that, then this is checkmate. So instead, my opponent played queen to c6, covering these squares so that I can't checkmate him, also giving his king a way to escape. And so here, I decided to, again, put some pressure as well as make another threat myself with knight to e5. And again, the idea is I know he's not going to let me take his queen. So after he plays queen to b7, just like we saw in that other variation, I simplified by just capturing. And this is one of those situations where I already have quite a material advantage, or I'm about to get a material advantage. So trading queens, simplifying the situation is a good idea in general. Okay, so queen takes b7 check, king takes b7, and knight takes f7. And sometimes you have to be careful if there's a lot of pieces on the board, taking here and opening up one of these files towards the king. But I figured with the material advantage, he doesn't have enough firepower to really threaten my king. So knight takes, and as well as I'm going to be winning the exchange here. Knight takes f7, and here this knight goes to f5, and of course I just take the rook here. Now, interestingly, I could take a move here and just play d5 because this fork has not left in any case. But it kind of transposes anyway. After knight takes h8, rook takes h8. I actually protect my pawn this way. d5 would have been good as well, but I think I just wanted to activate this rook. So rook to d8, and here I play d5, protecting the pawn, and also advancing it, which has some positives as well. And for example, it covers a c6 square, so this king can't get involved. Okay, my opponent plays his knight over here to d6. Of course, he's threatening my pawn on c4, and there's a few ways to defend this. I can move my rook on d1. I can move it to c1. But what I did here was kind of a multi-purpose move. I played my rook to d8. So it protects my knight here on, or I'm sorry, my pawn on c4, but it also allows this rook to go over to the king side and attack these two pawns as well. So kind of a multi-purpose move. I didn't want to move this pawn or this rook necessarily because I want to advance this a pawn eventually too. Okay? So my opponent brings his rook to the open file, and this is a great time to bring my king in. So now we're in the end game, and there are fewer chances of my king getting checkmated. So I want to bring it to the center. It's also a fighting piece. So here it is covering the e file, specifically e2 and e1, so that my opponent's rook cannot penetrate into the position. Okay, knight to e4, and here my opponent falls into a pin himself. So here I'm not going to win the rook, but this is going to allow me to simplify. I am attacking it twice here, attacking this knight twice, and he can't He doesn't have any discoveries. I mean, he could try this check here, but after I take it, I'm just up a piece. Or actually, I'm up a whole rook now because I was up the exchange. Okay? So instead, he goes back, and again, simplifying because it's much easier now to win because my additional material will be much more advantageous. And this is a fairly easy game to win, but I want to show you how I do it because a lot of times I will see, especially among my students, I will see them falter in trying to win these positions with extra material. And really, you can just make it easy for yourself. You don't need to look for the most precise move. You just need to make good moves and whittle your opponent down. And I'm going to show you how I did it here. Okay, he takes on e8, and then I just bring my rook in. The idea here, again, he's not going to let me take it, but I'm going to get on this 7th rank and attack these pawns. So here he moves his knight back, attacking the pawn on c4, and I let it go because I'm going to get at least 2 pawns if he wants to take this pawn. So he takes the pawn on c4, I take the pawn on g7, and he tries to advance it, but I just get behind it. My pawns over here are going to win, basically. So he checks me, and I bring my king to the center, and here he wants to get over here to c3. I think, what did I play? I did take this pawn. I could have tried to prevent this entry here by going king to d3, but then he gets this pawn on f2. So I really don't need to, if he wants to win one more pawn, it's not that big of a deal because these kingside pawns are going to win for me eventually. So I take here on h5, and then he hits me with this check, and then I bring my king over. Now here, my opponent has to be very careful, and you see here, he takes this pawn on a2, and now he's trapped. So if you just take a look here, I'll just show you. All of these squares are covered. So that will secure the victory also. You always want to look for those opportunities when you're winning. You can't get complacent when you have an advantage. So he tries to give his knight a way out, but I just take en passant, and then he starts to bring his king in, and that allows me to win this knight. And at this point, my opponent resigned. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope you found it very helpful. I know we are having some trying times in our world with the coronavirus, and again, I hope you guys are all taking care of yourselves and all are healthy and safe. But in the meantime, I hope we can enjoy some chess together as well. So let me know in the comments what you thought. Also, if you want to check out other videos that are more geared towards beginners, you can look over here for the link. Otherwise, stay safe, and I will see you next time.